I'm the first vegan woman to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I am a high-altitude mountaineer.
Hi, I'm Rodney.
I'm Alexis,
And this is The Vegan Agenda.
If you find this video informative, interesting, enjoyable, or helpful, please like, subscribe, and share.
My name is Janneke. I live in Austin, Texas. I've been vegan since I was 16, so I've been vegan for about 12 years now. I started as a vegetarian, like most vegans. I went vegetarian when I was 14, and I did that because I wanted to be a veterinarian. I signed up for all these animal science classes, including one that was in a nat phys class. It basically went over, here's a cow, here are all the parts of the cow, here's how cow works. As part of that class, one thing that we did was the teacher brought in different cuts of meat. So she brought in the brisket, the flank meat, all of those sorts of things. And we had to take the hunk of meat and identify which part of the cow it came from. And as these were being handed out and as we were aligning them, it was just sort of an aha moment. That picture of a cow looks a lot like a dog or a cat, where I can identify on the cat where the brisket is. I can identify on the dog where the flank is. I've always grown up with pets. So when I looked at the picture of the cow and saw my dog and thought of the brisket as coming from my dog or the flank is coming from my cat, it just triggered that moment of, I wouldn't do this to my cat or dog. I wouldn't do this to an animal that I love very much. How is this okay to do to a cow? How is this okay to do to any animal? So at that moment, that's what made me go vegetarian. From there, reading more about vegetarianism, reading more about how animals are treated in the industry, reading about the cruelty that's inherent in calf separation from their mothers, in how milk is harvested, in how eggs are harvested, that made me go vegan. The older I get, the more solidly planted I am in my veganism. The more I read about it, the more I learn about it, the better I understand it, and the better I understand why I'm a vegan. Beyond simply animals, it's also that question of consumption. Like, is it ever okay to consume without considering what the consequences of that are, especially with regards to climate change? Animals in the animal industry are incredibly environmentally destructive. If I'm partaking in animal products, I'm inherently part of that destruction. I don't want that. I don't want the destruction of this planet on my conscience. So I'm not interested in consuming animal products. I grew up in rural North Carolina. I'd never met a vegan before I went vegan. I didn't really know anything about it. Most of what I found, I came to on my own. I sat back and just considered who I was and what I wanted to be. Yes, it came up in the books that I was reading. I read a lot of philosophy books about veganism, and that's mostly what led me there. I eat a lot of beans, lots of lentils, mushrooms, I eat a lot of peanuts. Kidney beans are one of my favorites, and I know more chickpea recipes than you can shake a stick at. It's ridiculous the number of things I know about chickpeas. What I find about that as well is that they're relatively inexpensive, and there is so much you can do with beans. There is a whole world of recipes out there that you don't have to use meat substitutes for anything. I enjoy making lots of curries. I make stir fries. I make lots of sort of African stews as well that use those chickpeas and those kidney beans. And they're all fantastic. I do eat out sometimes. I try not to. It does get expensive eating out, but for my part, I like cooking for myself. Food is something that I love, and I have a really good time cooking. I think it can be if you approach it with the philosophy of, I only want to eat meat products that are vegan. So for instance, if you only ever want to eat burgers, yeah, that's going to get expensive quickly. The approach that I like to take, and the approach that I think is a good one for new vegans to take, is not try and fill in all those meat and animal gaps. It's rather look at the foods that are vegan and make those. So instead of eating burgers or fried chicken or those sorts of vegan equivalents, instead, look at curries. Curries are usually naturally vegan anyway. Try making a curry. Try something that's already naturally vegan. I do have a garden that I maintain. It's a pretty big garden, and I know that's not something that everybody can do, but it is something that I personally enjoy. So, for instance, my summer garden produced enough squash for me to have squash for a solid month. Which, granted, if you're not a squash fan, doesn't sound all that great. But the point is that I'm able to grow a lot of my own food, and I appreciate that. That's a fairly recent thing, though. I only recently was able to do that. Before that, what I found was I ended up buying a lot of produce at the grocery store, buying lots of beans at the grocery store. Grocery stores are fairly vegan friendly. You just have to be able to go into the sections that you want. There is a really big difference between the two. A plant-based diet is something where you just cut out animal products, but being vegan is more than that. Being vegan is having that philosophy of not only cutting it out of your diet, but cutting it out of everything and being cognizant of the source of what it is that you are consuming. It's having that lifestyle of caring about the source, of caring about the animals that are being exploited, of trying to do what you can to help them. Not all vegans are activists, and that's fine. But at the heart of veganism is that activism and is that decision to, at the very least, not partake in a culture that is inherently exploitative and destructive. I went vegan basically at the point when I was able to cook for myself. As soon as I moved out of my parents' house, I went vegan. Going back in time to before when I was vegan, there's not much I could tell my past self, because my parents ate meat and they were very happy meat eaters. So when you're a child living in a house like that, you don't necessarily have the ability to speak out and say, hey, I'm not going to eat dinner with you guys. My family is Dutch. We ate a lot of very traditional Dutch food. That's things like sausages, it's lots of meat-based diets. That means that there was lots of meat in the house, there was lots of reliance on having a vegetable and a meat on the plate. And my father's also a very big meat eater. He always wanted meat for every meal, which means that it was very difficult to go vegetarian, let alone vegan in my house, because my parents ate nothing but meat. Even after I went vegan, my parents were still very opposed to it. My dad said it was just a phase and that I'd grow out of it. I'm still here. My mother did and still does try to sneak meat into any food she cooks for me. There's an understandable tension there. My father's overweight, and he struggled with weight for quite a while. His wife has type 2 diabetes as well. One thing that his wife found after she was diagnosed with diabetes was that cutting down on animal products in her diet was really helpful. It helped her lose about 50 pounds, which is really phenomenal. I'm hoping my father will make the same decision. Fingers crossed. As far as benefits go, because I've been vegan for such a long time, there's not really a basis of comparison. I've basically grown up vegan at this point. My entire adult life I've been vegan. It's a fundamental part of my identity. I never really think about anything other than being vegan. It's who I am, which means that it's also helped form who I am. I like to think of myself as a confident, determined, relatively successful person, and that's partly because I'm vegan. Because being vegan is inherently looking at something and saying, I've made a decision on this, I'm using my will on this, and I'm using my own self-determination and my own self-control to say, I don't want that hot dog or what have you. Having that power and having the ability to do that in the first place, it helps you overall. You have more willpower and more self-control overall, and I appreciate that, and I've appreciated becoming a person who can do that. I also don't drink alcohol, and I use the same willpower that I used to be vegan to not drink alcohol. Similarly, I used to have a very big phobia of needles. Once again, drawing on that willpower that lets you say no to everything you grew up with in an entire society that pressures you to use animal products, I used that same willpower to break my phobia. It gives you that ability to have confidence in yourself. If you can say no to an entire society of animal consumption, you can say no to basically anything. I'm the first vegan woman to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I am a high-altitude mountaineer. I'm currently planning a trip to the Andes, and every summer I spend a lot of the summer climbing high-altitude peaks in California and South America. If vegans are weak, I don't know why. That's not something I'm familiar with. What I will say, though, is that vegan diets have to be properly maintained. You can't just eat junk food and be happy. You have to eat proteins. You have to eat a well-balanced diet. So if somebody is saying they feel malnourished or weak, likely they need to look at what they're eating and say, okay, I'm missing some proteins in my diet. I can get those from beans or lentils or what have you. There's lots of ways out there. You have to take a little bit of extra time with your diet, but then that's something you should do anyway, regardless of what you eat. When I first went vegan, there were a couple of times that I slipped. There was one time that I remember in particular. I was home by myself, and I looked at the pantry, and I wanted a snack. And there was this box of Chips Ahoy cookies with little M&Ms in them. These are not vegan. But I looked at it, and I thought, I really want a cookie. And so I got my cookie, and I took a bite. The moment I did it, it tasted like ashes in my mouth. The reality of what I was doing, the morality of everything I'd read, of everything that I believed, came crashing back in. And I looked at it and said, what are you even doing with your life? I had that moment where I put aside everything I believed. As soon as I actually acted on that lack of belief, it all came crashing back, and I knew that what I was doing was wrong. So I threw the cookie away. And since that moment, I have not slipped in the slightest. I am still completely vegan since that cookie. And I look at that moment and I think I'm a better vegan for it. That moment where I looked at it and said, I want this, acted on it, and realized it was wrong. I'll admit, I crave cheeseburgers, but I will never actually eat one. Cheeseburgers have sort of become a joke for me, where anytime that they're the epitome of foods I cannot have because they're burgers, they have cheese on them, they're the epitome. But I will never eat one because I can't eat it without the association of where it comes from. I think about that cow. I think about the cow that died to make the burger. I think about the cow that suffered to make the cheese. And I can't do it. And I never will. I've actually made some vegan cheese before. I find that it's nice and there's a place for it. But as I said, for my part, I like making food that is vegan for its own sake. So not necessarily trying to imitate meat. Vegan food will never really replace meat, I think. You'll never find a burger that's as good as an authentic cheeseburger. But that's okay, because vegan food is good in its own right, and vegan food is good in its own niche. I grew up in rural North Carolina, and if you ever want to go vegan on hard mode, go vegan in rural North Carolina. I didn't have any online resources. All I had was philosophy texts. They're helpful if you want to sort of do introspection and come to your conclusions through introspection and deep thought. It's not for everybody. A lot of people do go vegan because their friends go vegan or because they watch a lot of videos and things like that. For my part, this was before I had reliable internet, so for my part it was all books. When I did go vegan, there was a very, very strong reaction, not just from my family, but from literally everyone. Rural North Carolina is not really supportive of vegans. The number of times I answered the question, but where will you get your protein? Or, but chickens lay eggs naturally, it's what they do. The number of times I answered those questions was ridiculous. I could basically have my answers memorized at this point. My husband is vegetarian, so not quite vegan. He'll get there eventually. I believe in him. I don't allow meat in my house, and when I cook, I only cook vegan, so I don't cook anything with animal products for him. I host dinners myself. So for Thanksgiving, I have what I like to call a Friendsgiving, where I'll invite a bunch of friends over, and we'll have food that people choose to bring. I always cook tons of vegan food, so I'll make my squashes, I'll make casseroles, I make a really mean vegan gravy. I make a ton of pies, because I really enjoy pies, brownies, things like that. If people want to bring meat, that's their prerogative. I don't stop them, but I do make it clear to them, hey, this is the world of vegan food here, and it is better than your food. At this point, I very rarely encounter that. When I first went vegan, absolutely, but I don't live there anymore. I live in Austin, and Austin's a place that's incredibly vegan friendly. There is so many vegan options here, and it's really, really easy to be a vegan in Austin. Since moving here, I don't think I've encountered anybody who's mocked me or said anything derogatory about the fact that I'm a vegan. I think it's also that a lot of teenagers when they first go vegan, or college students when they first go vegan, encounter that resistance, because it's that resistance against something that's different, something that's strange. But as you get older and as you end up in a more mature group, that sort of goes away. People tend to accept each other and tend to accept people's views. And it's fine. I'm more or less out there on my own. Like I said, my husband is a vegetarian, and he's very supportive of me being vegan. But beyond that, I don't really have any vegan friends. It's mostly just me.
Now. You have
Oh,
two now.
thank you. I find that to be a really tricky question, because in asking the question, can individuals make a difference? You're basically asking individuals to make a global choice. I, on my own, with the decision to be vegan, that doesn't matter. That doesn't make a big difference. But I'm part of a large group that's vegan. I'm part of a whole bunch of people that have all made that same decision. And me going vegan also influences the others around me to make that decision. If I wasn't vegan, my husband wouldn't be vegetarian. As more and more people join this, as more and more people become vegan or go vegetarian, that is what makes that difference. That is what helps limit that animal consumption and limits those greenhouse gases. That's what matters. I on my own, not so much. The group as a whole, very much so. The thing that's really helped me stay vegan throughout everything I've done is to keep in mind why I'm vegan. If you believe in the cause behind it, like really believe in what you're doing and really think about what you're doing and embody it within yourself, put yourself in that position of the animals, use empathy, consider why it is that you are doing this. It is so much easier. Don't think of it in terms of food. Don't think of it in terms of, I really want that cheeseburger or I really want that cookie. Think about it in terms instead of, I want to make that difference. I want to be the change in the world. I want to be the best me I can be. And the best me I can be is not eating those animal products, is being part of this lifestyle that advocates for these animals. I actually grew up near a pork factory and a turkey farm, so I'm very familiar with the industrial levels of meat production. The turkey farm was something that in summer you couldn't really go near it because the stench was so horrific and because the screams of the turkeys were so loud. Similarly with the pork factory, it was the sort of thing where you could see pork in both its pre and post pork state, where you could go in, see the pigs, you could pick a pig out, and then they'd send you the sausage from that pig in a few weeks. In that sort of thing, yes, I've seen the videos as well, but I think for my part, actually seeing the animals live, seeing the conditions live, it makes a huge difference and it makes a huge impact to actually visibly see that animal suffering, to smell that suffering, to hear the suffering. That's what I think matters. I think a lot of people have misconceptions about vegans. I think there's this conception that vegans have a stick up their butt or that they just want to hold up signs and yell at people. That's not the case at all. What we choose to do ethically is all our own decision. For my part, I've made an ethical decision that I'm very happy with. I've decided that I don't want to be part of a society or a culture that is consumptive without consideration, that is destroying lives without ever considering them lives to begin with. This is a decision I've made. If somebody else looks at this and comes to the conclusion that they're okay with that, that's their prerogative. For my part, I don't agree. I don't understand that, but that's their prerogative. My sister is a good example of this. My sister went vegetarian. Now she runs a beef farm. It's quite a large difference. Hers is not an industrial beef farm, it's an organic beef farm, but it's still a beef farm. The cows still die at the end of the day. She was vegetarian and then ended up saying, this is dumb. She lost that empathy for animals and now she runs a farm. I don't quite know why, but I don't think of her as less of a person. She's still my sister. I still love her very much, and I hope someday that she'll change her mind and go back to being vegetarian or vegan. But until then, it's her prerogative. She's allowed to make that decision. When I was in school, I wanted to be a veterinarian. I was surrounded by an agricultural culture where it was all these slaughterhouses. Animals were seen as objects that could be used as much as possible. Pig trucks, chicken trucks went by my house every day. So when you're constantly subjected to that, when you're constantly subjected to animals as objects rather than animals as living things, it does wear down on you. It is much easier when you're constantly battered by this message of animal as object to take that to heart and to see animal as object. It's only when we step back and actually see it in an empathetic lens and see it in the context of friend or living thing that we're able to shake that animal as object mindset. Some people don't get that experience, and I wish more people could. I'd always grown up with pets. I love animals. They're sweet, they make me happy, and they're beautiful living things in and of themselves. And so I wanted to be a veterinarian to help them and to do the best I could for them. Ultimately, I think being a veterinarian was not the right choice for me, but that's fine. I don't usually go to activism events. What I've done in the past is help run advocacy groups and groups that advocate for a particular law to be changed or for a particular policy to be put forward. So for instance, when I lived in North Carolina, I worked to help promote a bill in the North Carolina House to better enable trap, neuter, release programs for feral cats. Not quite in the line of vegan activism, but very much in the line of animal rights and animal welfare, where that was preventing the suffering of thousands of cats in the state. That's the type of activism I like to do, more of that legal lines, more of those policy and politics changes. I also am working on a book at the moment, and I'll let you know when that's out. My philosophy is ultimately do no harm, or if I must do harm, do as little harm as I possibly can. I know that one of the arguments that's commonly raised against vegans is, oh, you can't be pure vegan because animals die when the plows go through the farms and all of that. And that's true, animals do die as part of industrial agriculture. Far fewer animals die as part of industrial agriculture than die in factory farms or die as part of me eating meat. If I can take the action that is less harmful and causes less suffering, I'll do that. Being a vegan causes less suffering than not being a vegan. So that's what I set out to do. And that's also partly why I grow my own vegetables as much as possible. If I'm growing my own vegetables, I control what happens there. I can control the limitation of pesticides. Like, I don't use any pesticides. I make sure my garden is as bee friendly and as butterfly friendly as possible. Make sure nothing dies when it's harvested. The books that I really enjoy, a couple of vegan chefs that wrote the Veganomicon, and they have a long line of cookbooks that have a lot of fantastic recipes, and I absolutely love them and everything they do. Beyond that, Brian Singer is a really fantastic philosopher, and I enjoy reading his works immensely, so I highly recommend that as well. I actually have a cupcake blog. Every week I listen to a piece of contemporary classical music and then make a cupcake based on how that music makes me feel. And then I send the recipes off to the composers if they're still alive. It's called Cupcakes for Composers. I think the real motivation I would offer is it's okay to struggle, it's okay to doubt. Like, it's a legitimately difficult thing to live in a culture that is so surrounded by animal consumption and so normalizes it, and then to take that step back and say, no, I don't want to be part of this. What I recommend doing is take that moment to yourself, breathe. Say, okay, I understand what they want me to do. I understand what society is pressuring me to do. I understand where all this is coming from. Why is it that I think differently? Go back to your beliefs. Go back to why you're trying to be vegan. And just sit there and contemplate that for a second. Let that hang in there. If you stop, give it that second, let that thought come into your head, it's much easier. It's okay to have doubts. You don't have to be perfect all the time. But take that moment and remember why you're doing what you're doing. That's what matters.
Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
excited about the writings that you're doing. I'm definitely going to check out your cupcake blog. We'll link that below for our viewers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to be interviewed, please visit the Vegan Agenda on Facebook. Look for the flying pigs.
We will be featuring more interesting and inspiring vegans, so be sure to like, subscribe, and click that bell for notifications. If you want to help us promote veganism, please support the Vegan Agenda on Patreon.
We would love to hear from you. Please comment below to let us know your thoughts.
Thanks for watching.